So Milana, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. And I'm really excited because I had come across your organization recently here, and it really kind of struck me as very interesting in terms of just the overall complexity of it. And the platform itself is STEMX. So I want to get from your perspective, how is it that you would describe your platform for our audience?
Yeah, definitely. We are a vertical SaaS software that primarily focuses on distribution of independent music and the payments that are due to various artists, their collaborators, and their teams resulting from their earnings in music. So we're a vertical fintech, or vertical SaaS, I should say, with a fintech angle embedded in it.
Yeah, and what I find to be really interesting is because you and I have had a conversation before around your platform, and one of the things I really want to highlight is I know that individuals that are very familiar with the payments ecosystem obviously recognize that it certainly can be very complex, and then especially when you start to get into the cross-border realm of things. And I know that that's something that your organization takes a look at because obviously you're getting payments in from a global space because where you're in the music industry, obviously music is global and therefore artists are getting paid from a global standpoint here. But I'm curious because I know that a lot of our listeners are going to understand the payments ecosystem, but now what I want to understand a little bit better is your ecosystem, because I think that they'll certainly appreciate the complexities of the payments industry ecosystem, but I want to enlighten our audience to make them understand that it's not just the payments ecosystem, it also goes beyond it. So perhaps maybe you could kind of dive into a little bit of your payment ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely. So the complexity is on multiple levels, right? Let's start with the knowing who to pay, which is the first challenge, right? Oftentimes musicians, when they're preparing to produce music, they sit in multiple recording sessions. So for an artist, before you produce the results of an album, which is 6 to 10 tracks, they usually make about 60 to 100 songs. So for months, they'll be in a recording studio with various collaborators, songwriters, producers, and every song, there's shareholders based on who was in the recording studio, who contributed. And then of course, you don't make the full song in one session. You then rework it in another session, new people enter the equation. And so initially, the pain point is just helping them memorialize who is actually in the recording session and what the splits are on the song. I can't tell you how many artists forget that. And then after they, have the final product of the songs they want to pick out of the hundreds they made, then they have to wreck their brains to remember all the shareholders that were involved. So that was the first problem. It's even just memorializing who you need to pay. The second pain point is around, in music, there's two copyrights. There's the sound recording and the publishing. If I explain sort of the rules and logic related to how they get paid out, you guys are going to have your eyes bleed out and it's going to take the whole entire session. So I'll spare you on that, but feel free to Google it. And the point is that there's crazy regulations related to the logic of how each piece of the copyright gets paid out, what organizations can collect on them, and how the streaming services are required to allocate the funds between the two copyrights. So that's problem number two. The third pain point is that Spotify, for example, and Apple and Amazon, if we release music, we release it globally. But when they pay us in USD. Actually, that's not true. They pay us in various currencies from various partners around the world. So they have different territories. So there's the Japanese territory, the European territories, the LATAM territories. And so when we get reported to, we get paid out in multiple currencies for the same song. Even though the artist is based maybe in the US or maybe they're in the UK, we get paid out for multiple currencies. And so the pain point there is really on the effects rate. So when they pay us, they lock in an effects rate. And we, by the time we turn over the fees and do all the logic with the splits in our app and pay out the artist, it's a different effects rate. So we want to be able to minimize the loss there. And sometimes there's a gain, but more frequently than not, it's a loss. And in other cases, when we actually have to pay the creator, this is the really funny part, right? Most people don't think of musicians and their collaborators as being underbanked, but they are. So early in STEM's history, we started working with an artist who at the time was huge on YouTube, and today it's huge on TikTok, right? But remember, these are kids. They're not 18 years old. They don't have bank accounts. So initially when we set up the payment infrastructure, we set it up for ACH transfer. And then quickly after a couple of months, we realized that that's not going to be sufficient for our user base. So we of course had to introduce Venmo, Square Cash, all these other digital tools because these kids don't have bank accounts.
Yeah, I think that was interesting. And there's a couple of parts really that I want to pull out here, because I think very often, especially a lot of the individuals that I talk to, you kind of have applications that fit into two different buckets. You've got the one that's kind of the cross-border B2B part side of things, which is kind of the from the streaming services to particularly your platform there. But then you've also got the second part of it, which is kind of the payment instrument then to, let's just say, the gig worker side of things. So you're kind of taking like two buckets and really having to put them together under one roof here, to kind of create one app that then pays artists on that. But then there's that additional component then too, where it's not just one individual that's getting paid on this one particular thing. It's no, it's okay, there might be one primary person, but then there's a whole lot of other individuals that have to get paid. So it's kind of a gig worker with an nth degree problem, so to speak, if you will, just because there are so many variations. There's so many other different people that are there that you have to make sure that that's kept all in line. So I think the application as a whole is extremely interesting to just show the full complex nature of not only just the payment side of things, but also the music side of things, and how payment realistically flows from one entity all the way down to some collaborator on some artist's work that's there. I mean, I certainly think it's very interesting in terms of just being able to watch the flow of that and how that actually all pans out. And one of the other interesting things that I really found about your app was also the lending as a service side of things, because that certainly makes a lot of sense, because where you're able to see the flow of money coming into the account, obviously then you can make credit type of decisions based upon that, because you can see, okay, well, we understand how much revenue is coming in, the typical lifespan of that revenue stream that's coming in, and then make lending decisions based upon that. But maybe you could help enlighten our audience to that side of the application as well.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking to, again, the fact that many creators and musicians and the people around them are underbanked, right? This is a population or a segment of the population that I think most banks don't really understand. Again, they're gig workers, right? The term, the gig economy, really dates back to its origins in the music space. And so not just the artists are the ones who have irregular payments and schedules, but also, oftentimes when you work in the music business, you don't necessarily have a flat fee salary. You're oftentimes someone who's getting paid on commission, and your commission could either be on an artist that you're working with, so getting a percentage of their earnings in the case of managers, business managers, lawyers, etc., or you're getting a percentage of earnings off a project you worked on. And that's the case of songwriters, producers, collaborators, etc. And so, when you are trying to build a credit history, you don't have like a sustainable source of income. And your assets are typically, or your money is tied in assets that's typically a copyright, it's a song. Very few artists when they're starting off own property, have a car, they don't really have credit card bills they're paying, so they don't have an easy way to build credibility. And so when it comes time for them to grow their business, they're not able to go to a bank and get a small business loan to be able to invest in themselves as an artist and musician. There's not a format for that really applies to them. And more importantly, as they're thinking about investing in their own careers, many artists, when they're trying to go to like the vocational schools to improve their production or go to art schools, like there's not great scholarship programs, there's not great loans available to them either. And so for us, because we have the data from the streaming services on the value of the asset, the song, whether it's Spotify or Amazon or Apple, Google, YouTube, any digital revenue stream, we now know what that asset is worth, and we can predict based on the underwriting data that we have that's unique to STEM, what the history and the trajectory of that asset's going to be based on genre, age of artist, what their playlisting history looks like in terms of how well they've been curated. And we use that data to be able to give them a pipeline advance on their earnings, anywhere between 6 months to 36 months. And for them, that's incredible because they're able to access that capital faster than they would otherwise, right? The other alternatives for them to get access to capital are going to the major labels or other distribution entities that give them advances. But those terms are incredibly predatory, right? So we've heard of artists feeling like they're getting screwed, and the traditional label deal for an artist is what's called a 15 to 20% royalty rate. What that actually means is that if an artist takes $100,000 advance from a label, which is pretty typical for a developing act, they have to recoup that 100K out of their royalty share. So out of their 15 or 20%. So in order for them to break even, they have to pay back like I think it's like 4 million and something, or 400,000 something, because they're recouping out of their share only. Meanwhile, the label entity is really pulling in the rest of the earnings and pocketing them. So the cost of capital on an effective fee structure is like over 400%. Now that's like the most predatory type of deal, right? And the more artist-friendly type of deals that are happening today with the major labels, where the artist has leveraged, maybe they've proven traction, are called JV partnerships. And it's a 50-50 net profit share agreement, which means that the label gives an advance, call it $1 million. The artist has to recoup $1 million out of their 50% first, and then they split the net profits after that. But again, that's 100% effective fee on that, right? That's insane. And so with us, when we decided to launch Scale, which is our lending product, our advances product, because it's a merchant credit advance, it's not a loan. And what was really important to us was to make sure that the artists knew what they were giving up in exchange for the money that they were taking, and had control over the duration, had control over the fee, and were incentivized to take less money up front, recoup it faster where they would pay a smaller fee, and then be able to take more money as their revenue grew, and the money would get cheaper along the way because they start building credibility in the app. And the other thing that they have control over is that they can recoup at whatever fee they want and be able to pocket a flow through of earnings. So if I'm an artist that's making $10,000 a month and I want to take out a $50,000 advance, which is a 5-month advance of my earnings, I don't have to give up 100% of my monthly income to pay it down. I can choose to give up 50% to pay down the advance, and 50% flows through my pocket every single month. So if I'm making 10K, that's $5,000 that I can use to cover my own personal expenses. So I'm not giving up 100% of my revenue. And for so many artists, that's incredibly important because they need to cover their overhead. And especially in a time like, with COVID, where they're not touring, there's not much other revenue streams available to them. They're really dependent on their digital revenue streams there.
Yeah, I think that's certainly very interesting. I find the whole facet of just kind of the lending as a service industry very interesting, especially because I think it's really kind of come to it's just matured a bit more now that there's more data that's out there, and you see a lot of organizations like yours that's using alternative data. But I mean, the principles of it are realistically the same, of just, okay, how much cash flow do we think is coming in, and what's the risk reward in terms of all of that. So I mean, the baseline of that is there, and I think certainly organizations like yours will obviously always have a place in the market because you have other industries that are looking to take so much advantage of particular people within there with some of these very high and unfavorable terms for the end artists in this particular case that's there. And so I think that's certainly very interesting. And I think, to your point in terms of just artists not going on tour, I think there was a recent Forbes article that interviewed the lead singer from Shinedown in terms of just his view of what's kind of going on in the music industry right now. And that was kind of his main thing, is that he's like, a lot of people don't realize that a vast majority of an artist's money is made on tour. It's not really made through a lot of the streaming services. Yes, there's certainly money to be made, but a lot of it is just done through tour. And he was kind of like, it's interesting because he's like, his life usually revolved around touring. And now where it's not, he kind of has to shift and kind of make other plans there. So Milana, thank you so much for taking the time today for speaking to me about STEMX. I really do appreciate it. And I certainly hope to have you back on another episode real soon.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it as well.
Thank you.